Okay, I'm going to bring a message. I've preached this, I know, once here in Lakeland. It was the first sermon that I preached after Wendy and I moved here. And there was a reason for it. Some of you know what the reason was, and it was kind of a harsh sermon. I was trying to flush somebody out. We had a problem, and I was trying to, so I preached something in order to flush somebody out, find out if they were real or not. And within 2 weeks, we found out that they weren't. And this was a sermon that got the job done. Some of you original members will know exactly who it is that I'm talking about. It was the first person that we ever excluded from the church. And at that time, I titled it, Which Jesus? Now, I've preached it other times before. I think I've preached it in Vegas. But looking at it this past week, it just started spidering off into more, not so much more areas, but more defined areas, more clear areas, more definitive areas, if you will, and got pretty shocking. And some of you may end up being shocked. Now, I'm not trying to flush anybody out this time, so I'm just going to preach it. But I think some people are going to might be a little bit shocked by some of the things I have to say this morning. Not that they're any different than anything else I've ever said. It's just I'm just shining a bigger light on them is all. Now, since it has grown, and it'll end up being 2 parts instead of 1, I'm going to do what I've always seen them do in courtrooms. When I grew up, there was a show called Perry Mason. Some of you might remember that. Some of you younger folks might remember a show called Matlock, where Andy Griffith played a country lawyer. In all of the, or LA Law, or any of these laws, you always watch one of the, even my cousin Vinny, you would see this, and that is that the first thing that the lawyer does is he makes his opening statement. He stands up and he tells you what it is he's going to try to prove, right? To lay out the case. And then he starts to present evidence. So what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to make my opening statement. I'm going to tell you what it is that I'm going to prove next week. Then next week, I'm going to start calling the witnesses and actually going through to prove what I'm going to say today. So, I mean, we've got Bible verses we're going to be looking at, of course, but the real proof is going to be next week. Now, I have already sent texts to everyone that I knew that wasn't going to be here today to tell them that as soon as this is uploaded, watch it. Because if you come in here next week without hearing this, you're not going to have any idea what's going on. It's not going to make any sense to you. And there's going to be some comments in there that if you don't see how I'm building it up, you need part 1 in order to really grasp part 2. So we're going to talk about another Jesus. I want you to turn in your Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. And this is an interesting thing. There's 2 passages we're going to look at that we're going to start this off and base it on. And I looked at every commentary that I have in my library, both on the shelves and on my computer. And I have close to 2,000 books on my computer program and a bunch of books in my library. And out of every commentary that I looked at, nobody, they just skipped right over the top of this. No big deal. And yet, it's huge. It is a huge deal. And that's one of the things I intend to prove. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 3 and 4. But I fear, lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. For if he that cometh preacheth another Jesus, whom we have not preached, or if you receive another spirit, which ye have not received, or another gospel, which ye have not accepted, you might well bear with him. Paul was afraid that someone was going to come along and preach a Jesus Christ that is not the Jesus Christ that he was preaching, that it would be another Jesus Christ and another spirit and another gospel. Well, we want to take a look at who this another Jesus is. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to lay out the case. Then next week, we're going to look at some attributes of the Jesus in the Bible and compare them to the Jesus that we see taught out in the world to find out if it's the same guy or not. Okay? Now look at Galatians chapter 1, where he talks to the church in Galatia, or the churches in Galatia, regarding this same thing, beginning at verse 6. I marvel. See, these had already moved away. He was afraid the people in Corinth were going to do exactly what the people in Galatia did. I marvel that you're so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another. Now, we'll talk about that in a minute. But there would be some that would trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. As we said before, so I say now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than that ye have received, let him be accursed. Now we noticed over in 1 Corinthians it talked about the way that the serpent beguiled Eve with his subtlety. Subtlety means craftiness, treachery, if you will. That's really what subtlety means. Now, let's look at this, at the word another. In the English, it means a second or further person or thing of the same type as that previously mentioned or known about. A second or more. I have two hymnals here. I have the hymnal that I use every Sunday morning. I have another hymnal. Are they the same book? They look the same, but they're not the same book, are they? Because one of them is in my right hand and the other one is in my left hand. So we have another Jesus that tries to look just like the Jesus of the Bible. But it's not the Jesus of the Bible. It's another one. Let me give you another example that I came up with this morning on the driving here. I realized I didn't have to bring the other hymnals. Because today, whether you know it or not, there are two James Hendersons in the room. There's one standing up here and there's one sitting back there in the back. We're not the same guy. If somebody walked in the room and asked, hey, I need to speak to James Henderson, somebody's going to say, well, Blake will point and say, go talk to him. And I would say, go talk to him because my name's Jim. But the point is, you see, there are a whole bunch of Jesus Christs out there. The Jehovah's Witnesses have one, the Mormons have one, the Presbyterians have one, the Lutherans have one, the Catholics they all have one, and they're all different. They all have different characteristics. One of the things that used to really boggle my mind was they come along and tell you have to believe in Jesus Christ in order to go to heaven. Well, which one? There's 4,000 of them. Which one am I supposed to believe in? Which Jim Henderson is the preacher in the room? The one standing back there, sitting back there, or me? The world is full of Jesus Christs. Now, I got to believe in one of them to go to heaven? How do I know which one? Well, you check the Bible, you find out what the Jesus Christ of the Bible is, and you find out believing in him isn't going to get me into heaven. If I believe in him, I'm already going to heaven. That's something we'll prove next week. Okay, so if this another Jesus isn't the same, he's not the same, might look the same, but he's not the same, and if it's another Jesus claiming to be the Jesus, then this another Jesus is an imposter, and he's a counterfeit. An impostor is one who imposes on others, a deceiver, swindler, cheat, now chiefly one who assumes a false character or passes himself off as someone other than he really is. A counterfeit is made in imitation of that which is genuine. It's imitated or forged. Now, how do you know a counterfeit from the real? In the FBI, the way they used to train guys to spot counterfeit bills was they made them memorize everything about the true bill. And then all they had to do was look for differences. They could look at the counterfeit. All they had to do was spot one thing that was different on the counterfeit from the genuine, and now you know who the counterfeit is. That's what we're going to do next week. We're going to look at attributes of the real Jesus and compare that with what we see in the world. We'll only look at about 4 of them, that's enough. But we can look at those 4 attributes and figure out which one is the real and which one is the fake. Now in the Greek, where it says another Jesus, that is the Greek word allos, which means a lot like the English does, meaning other, another, indicated that which is simply numerically distinct. Again, numerically distinct, 1, 2. Different, but numeric. Okay, so that allos is basically additional. There's an additional Jesus, if you could say it that way. So this other Jesus intends to look just like the Jesus of the Bible. He wants you to believe in him, but he's not the Jesus of the Bible. He's another Jesus. He's a fake Jesus. He's a counterfeit Jesus. He's an imposter. And you know what that makes him? That makes him a false god. Think about that for a minute. You worship a false god. That's called idolatry. God doesn't like that very much. You worship this another Jesus, and you're committing an act of idolatry. It's not a benign subject, folks, and this is what I was talking about where it starts to get a little shocking. This other Jesus, another Jesus, he can't help you when it comes to your relationship with God. All he can do is harm it. Because if you worship him, you're worshiping a false god. That is not going to help you when it comes to your relationship with the God of heaven. And he can't help you when it comes to saving you from your sins, because he's a fake. He's a fraud. He's a counterfeit. He's not real. And not only that, as we're going to see next week, he's a product of Satan. He is a product of Satan. Over in Isaiah, when we see the 5 I wills of Satan, and one of them is, I will be like the Most High. Whatever the Most High has, Satan has to have also. The Most High has a Jesus Christ. Guess what? Satan has a Jesus Christ, and he's another Jesus. You know, folks get all worked up about people like Anton LaVey, who was the high priest of the Church of Satan, and Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath and Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin and some of his comments about how the devil helped him and on and on and on and on. And yet they don't seem to understand that the real Satan worshipers on planet Earth are your friends. They're the ones that attend the Presbyterian or the Methodist or the Southern Baptist. They go to those churches and they worship a false Jesus. They worship a false God. And that false God is backed up by the devil himself. That's a little shocking, but it's true. You know, there's a time when the Samaritan woman, Jesus met her at a well, and he said to her over in John chapter 4 and verse 22, ye worship you know not what. Not you know not who, You know not what. Because the Samaritans didn't worship the God of heaven, they worshiped a fake God. And as a result, they were worshiping the devil. Even though they had the same Bible, they weren't worshiping the God of heaven. They thought they were, just like your friends that go to the Presbyterian church, they think they're Christians. They're not. They're Satanists. They just don't realize it. They're worshiping the God of this world, not the God of heaven. They just don't know it. So, is it any wonder that they celebrate pagan holidays? Of course not. They're pagan. And if they ever understand that, well, you usually got a fight on your hands, or they convert. So, this is not a benign issue. It's something that we need to pay attention, because we don't want to end up worshiping. So what if ours is the wrong one? Well, then we better change, right? If we're worshiping the wrong Jesus, well, we better figure that out, and we better switch and go find the real one. And we'll do that next week. I trust that you'll see that when we get through with it, then we're already worshiping the right one. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, you think about the Gentiles. Now, the Gentiles were pagans. They were left in darkness. Only the Jews, for the most part, knew the truth back in the Old Testament days, up until the time the gospel went to the Gentiles, and they worshipped false gods, right? They had idols, and they worshiped false gods. So now I want you to see exactly why I just made the statement that I made about worshiping a false god makes you worship Satan. I want you to see it in writing. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 20. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would not that ye should have fellowship with devils. If you worship a false Jesus Christ, you're worshiping a devil. Now, you may not know it, but you are. And that's the way God sees it. God expects you to worship him in spirit and in truth, not in spirit and in lies. And the false Jesus is a liar. This is another point. This is one of the primary reasons that we, as our ancient forefathers, the Anabaptists always did, require people to be rebaptized. If you're baptized into one of these devil-worshiping churches, we're not going to take that. We're not going to allow you to come into Jesus Christ's church when all you did was get wet under a devil as a god. That's not an acceptable baptism, and so we require to get in the water again. Now, let's go back to that Galatians verse real quick. Galatians 1. Where it says, Galatians 1, verse 6, I marvel that you are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another. What in the world is that supposed to mean? Another gospel which is not another. Well, in the English, it's not real clear. In the Greek, it's clear as day. Because that another is a different word. We looked at the another Jesus, and I told you that's the Greek word allos, which is different numerically, right? This word is atros. So I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto atros, another gospel, which is not a loss. It's a different word, and it means different. Atros is something that is generically distinct or different, not additional. The Jesus is additional. The gospel and the spirit, and it's the same way over in the Corinthian passage that we looked at. Allos referred to the another Jesus. Atros referred to the Spirit and the gospel. And they're different. They're not the same. The gospel is different with this another Jesus than it is with the Jesus of the Bible. Another prop. This is a King James New Testament. It's not the whole Bible, it's just the New Testament. It belonged to my dad, and I actually found my dad's original Social Security card in it as a bookmarker. But this is a King James New Testament. This is the New World Translation. This is a Jehovah's Witness New Testament. And surprise, surprise, they're not the same. They don't say the same thing, they're different. This is an example of a Atros. They're not just numerically distinct, they're different. So the Spirit and the gospel that back up this another Jesus are a different gospel and a different spirit. Okay? Thayer's Greek English lexicon says that allos, as compared with atros, denotes a numerical indistinction from qualitative difference. Allos adds one besides, atros distinguishes one of two. Allos generally denotes simply distinction of individuals. That James Henderson and this James Henderson. Atros involves the secondary idea of difference of kind. So the gospel that is teaching this another Jesus is a completely different gospel than the gospel of the Jesus of the Bible. Well, that gives you an idea of how we can figure out which one's which, right? We can just look at the attributes of the Jesus of the Bible and look at his gospel and compare it to anything else out there that doesn't line up with that, and they're teaching another Jesus, whether they know it or not. Okay, I'll show you next week when we get into some of the words on this, that if you're a big-time preacher in one of these big-time churches that require that you have years of education in order to get the job, you know you're lying through your teeth. You know you're a fraud, or you believe in a false God. You might believe in a false God, but you know that the God you're teaching ain't the one that you're teaching. They have twisted these new Bibles around to the point where they even lie about what they say. And a first semester Greek student would catch it. It's obvious as the nose on my face. You know, I mean, if you're just kind of a old country preacher, you probably don't, that doesn't have an education, you probably don't know any better. But the ones that have gone to school and have a master's or a doctorate in theology, they know what they're saying. They know they're lying. Okay, so this another spirit and another gospel are completely different from the spirit and the gospel taught in the Bible. In fact, when you look at them, they're the polar opposite of what the Bible teaches. And they point to this other additional Jesus who is a false Jesus, a counterfeit, an imposter, and a devil. Okay? Further, this is a Jesus, a spirit, and a gospel that is against and antagonistic to the Jesus and the gospel presented in the Bible. He's the opposite, and they don't like each other. He's against him. He teaches against the Jesus of the Bible. Now, can anybody tell me the word that has the primary meaning of someone or something that is against or antagonistic to a particular person or thing? Anti. That's the definition of the prefix anti. Something that is against and antagonistic to something else. I have allergies, and so I take antihistamines. Antihistamines are little pills that you take that kill off the results of what histamine does to your body when an allergen gets in there. Keeps your nose from running, okay? Sometimes I will get bacterial infections like in bronchitis, and if it's a bacterial infection, they give you an antibiotic or an antibiotic. Biotic refers to something living. The anti is there designed to kill whatever it is that's living, kill that organism. Sometimes you'll get pain, and so you take what's called an anti-inflammatory, right? And that fights the inflammation. Well, in this case, this is an anti that's against Christ. So what do you think this another Jesus is called? Antichrist. You ever heard of him? You worship this other Jesus, you're worshiping the Antichrist. Now, let's look at some verses. Because see, there's more of them out there than just the one at the end of the world. In 1 John chapter 2 and verse 18, little children, it is the last time. And as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. You see, there's a bunch of them out there. And this another Jesus is one of them. Look at verse 22, same chapter. Who is a liar but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist, that denieth the Father and the Son. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 3. And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is in the world. And finally, 2 John verse 7. This is every place where Antichrist occurs in the Bible, by the way. 2 John verse 7. For many deceivers are entered into the world who confess not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an Antichrist. So there are numerous Antichrists. Now, there's one guy that we all refer to coming at the end of time that we call Antichrist. He's not actually named that in the Bible, but the one that you always hear about. And I believe that this guy, that the final personification of this Antichrist character is going to be someone that's under the power of Satan, that claims to be Jesus Christ himself, that has returned from heaven, who will rule a one-world empire, and he will be revealed shortly before the actual second coming. That's who I believe the guy will be. Over in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not, when I was yet with you, I told you these things, and now you know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. When his time comes, folks, he'll be revealed. You'll know who he is. We don't need to worry about him yet. He's not here yet. Let me show you why. And I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of what I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see the Scofield Bible full open up right in front of us. I think we are going to see first a world empire emerge that looks just like the Schofield Antichrist world empire. Looks just like it. The problem is that ain't him. And then I think you're going to see the devil pull off one of the greatest magic tricks you've ever seen and make it look like Christ returned and destroys that guy. And when that happens, that's the real Antichrist. So a fake first, and then the real, and then the real Christ will destroy him. But watch, it talks about a great falling away here. Picture this for a minute. All these churches out here that have been teaching all this premillennial nonsense since the beginning of the 20th century. All of these politicians that feel that they have to honor what goes on over there in the Middle East. And all of a sudden, they start to see it unfold. They start to see this world empire raise up with this character that looks just like what they expect him to, this Antichrist, to look like. And then a second coming happens. How many of those people do you think are going to jump out of those churches and run to Jerusalem to bow down to this guy? All of them? Because that's what they've been led to believe. And I think you're going to see it happen. If we live long enough to see it happen, I think that's what you're going to see. And then the real Christ is going to show up and destroy him. Now, let me show you why. Turn to Revelation chapter 17. Told you it was splintering on me. Revelation chapter 17, verses 10 and 11. He's talking, well, let's go back a little bit. He's talking to John about these different empires that have come. In verse 10, and there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Okay? 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. Okay? The 5 that are fallen, Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia, Medo-Persia, and Greece. Those 5 were world empires that had fallen at the time that John was writing. 1 is, John wrote during the time of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was still there. It hadn't fallen apart yet. And the other is not yet come. Well, that's where Schofield stops. So his teaching is that the next world empire that comes will be the Antichrist. It'll be the beast. When the next world empire gets here, it's going to be the beast run by the Antichrist. Okay? Look at verse 11. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. There's 2 more coming, folks. There will be one that comes, and then right out of it will come another one, which is why my theory is that you're going to see what looks like the Schofield Bible, and you're going to see what looks like Christ returning to set up his millennial kingdom on earth, which he will start doing, but that's the real Antichrist. And that's the guy that's going to make you take the mark of the beast. So you don't need to worry about the mark of the beast yet. He ain't here yet. Look at Revelation chapter 13, verses 15 through 18. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, For it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. 3 sixes. 6 is the number of man. 3 sixes is man pretending to be God, making himself out as a trinity. That's the guy that's going to bring the mark. And until he shows up, there's no reason to even consider it or get worried about it or think it's a Social Security number or a Visa card or a COVID vaccine or a whatever. Okay? But anyway, that's what I think is going to happen. I think you're going to see one world empire come right out of another world empire, and whoever heads up that, whoever that one world leader is that everybody knows and everybody goes to worship. Think of this, the only people that aren't going to worship him are the ones in these little churches like this. Because all of the other churches are lining up to bow down to this guy when he shows up. And what does Satan want? He wants to be like the Most High. You can't be like the Most High by being different. He wants people to worship him. He wants everybody to worship him. And when this time comes, if you don't, well, I'll kill you off. And once I finally kill off everybody that won't worship me, everybody will worship me and I'll be God. That's what crazy, twisted people with bad wiring do. And that's what he does as well. And so he's set up. You know, there's a place in Revelation that says that he deceiveth the whole world. He's got pretty much all of it deceived. He's got the religious people deceived because they're worshiping the wrong God. He's got the politicians deceived because they think they're all powerful and they've got something going for them when they don't. They're just stooges. He's got everybody deceived. Look at Galatians chapter 1 and verse 7 again. We'll look at a couple of more words here. Galatians 1 and verse 7. That verse where it says, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. The word pervert means to interfere with or distort, to impede, thwart, to turn aside from the correct meaning, use, or purpose, to misapply, to misconstrue, or to distort. That's what they want to do to the true gospel. Distort it, misapply it. It comes from the Greek word metastrepho, which means to turn about, to turn around, to cause a change in state or condition, change, alter something into something else, often its opposite. You see, the whole point of this is to turn the gospel around backwards, to turn it into something that it's not, and to teach another Jesus that supports this other gospel. Now we have, if we go down here a little bit farther and it talks about an angel, remember that we define words by their primary meanings here, unless it creates a contradiction. So a lot of people look at this and they see this angel from heaven and they think, oh, that's the angel Moroni from the Mormons. But that's not the primary meaning of the word angel. The Greek word that's translated angel here is the word angelos. And the Greek word angelos, the primary meaning of angelos is a human messenger serving as an envoy or one that is sent. The idea of a celestial being as an angel is a secondary meaning. It's not the primary meaning of the word angelos. This is talking about preachers, folks. This is talking about men that claim to be called from God that go out and preach this another Jesus. That's who Paul's talking about, accursing these people. They're humans. And they stand up in the Presbyterian Church and the Roman Catholic Church and all of these other churches, and they preach this another Jesus. Now, that might lead you to the question of why. Why in the world would you do this? Why? What's the point? What is the reason behind this? What are you trying to accomplish? Why go through? You think about the history of the church. Early on, you had just a bunch of independent churches scattered all over the Roman Empire. And during that time, Satan was trying to persecute the church out of existence. And he found out it didn't work. That one didn't work. It just made it stronger. Churches tend to get stronger during times of persecution than they do when things are going good. And you may realize this in your own life. When is it that you get closer to God? Is it when all the bills are paid and everything's good and hunky-dory and there's no problems? No. You get closer to God when there's trouble, right? When things aren't going all that well, that's when you start falling down on your knees and praying for help. But when things are going pretty good, well, everything's okay. So thanks, appreciate it, but you're not as fervent in your prayer life as you would be if there was trouble. So the church is just made up of people that follow the same thing. So when the church is under persecution, the church gets stronger. It spends more time. You look over look at the history of Israel, ancient Israel, because she would drift away from God and God would punish her, and then she'd pull back to God again, right? And then God would bless her and things would get better, and then they'd drift back off again. That's human nature, folks. We're all stuck with this stupid, bad seed that we got from Adam, and that's a human thing. So when Satan decided to persecute the church, it just made it stronger. Well, now, how am I going to get rid of the church? He counterfeited it. First, he put together the Roman Catholic Church. Then out of that came all of the Protestant churches. You go back and I'm going to show you some quotes next week where John Calvin taught the same thing the Catholics did. He didn't have a problem with their doctrine. He had a problem with some of their practices. The same with Martin Luther. The 95 Theses that he nailed to the door of the chapel in Wittenberg, it didn't talk about doctrine. His issue were indulgences and personal behavior on the part of some of the cardinals and some of that other stuff. So the Protestant churches, that was a reformation of the Roman Catholic Church. It was not a reformation of Christianity, because the Roman Catholic Church has never been Christian. I even remember when I was a kid, they didn't even call themselves Christians. You would ask them, "Oh, you're a Christian?" "No, I'm a Catholic." Right? We've got former Catholics in the room. That's the way it used to be. They didn't even consider themselves Christian. They're not. That's one of the reasons that I actually agree with Barack Obama when he made the statement that we are not a Christian nation. We're not. Because the only Christians are the folks in little rooms like this. And there ain't that many of them around. Okay. Why would you set something like this up? Turn to Acts chapter 20. Where Paul's going to tell us. We got two passages here we're going to look at. Acts chapter 20, beginning at verse 28. Take heed, therefore, unto yourselves. Now he's talking to the elders of the church of Ephesus. Take heed, therefore, unto yourselves and to all the flock over the which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers, to feed the church of God which he hath purchased with his own blood. For I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them. Therefore, watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I ceased not to warn everyone night and day with tears. Draw away disciples after them. To draw means to pull. There were going to be false teachers. Some of them come right out of the very elders that he was talking to, that would pull disciples away from the truth. And it was going to start happening in the very first century. That's one of the reasons. Now, this where it says that perverse men, perverse means to pervert. And we already looked at what pervert meant, to turn away from that which is good, right, or true. So these guys are going to come along and pull people away from the truth. Well, if you pull them away from the truth, where do you pull them to? The lie, the false. Look at Romans chapter 16. Verses 17 and 18. Now I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine, which ye have learned, and avoid them. Contrary means to oppose, to strive against, to thwart, to impugn, to contradict, gainsay, to speak right or argue against. So people that do that, we're to mark them and avoid them, stay away from them. For they that are such serve not our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and by good words and fair speeches deceive the hearts of the simple. By good words and fair speeches, they deceive the hearts of the simple. To deceive means to ensnare, to take unawares by craft or guile, to overcome, overreach, to get the better of by trickery, to beguile, to betray into mischief or sin, to mislead. That's what these guys are trying to do. And they're trying to do it to the simple. Now, this word simple means free from duplicity, dissimulation, or guile. Someone who is free from duplicity, dissimulation, or guile. Duplicity, the quality of being double in action or conduct, the character or practice of acting in two ways at different times or openly and secretly, deceitfulness or double dealing. Two-faced. Somebody that's two-faced. That is what duplicity is. So a simple person is free of that. They're not. They are not. They're the opposite of two-faced. Okay? Dissimulation, the action of making or process of becoming unlike, the opposite of assimilation. Somebody that's different. And guile is insidious, cunning, deceit, and treachery. Okay? So the simple are free from this. They're not duplicitous. They have no guile. And the definition continues on and says innocent and harmless, undesigning, honest, open, straightforward. You know what the simple look like? Doesn't that look a lot like what you would expect a disciple to look like? Isn't that what we want to see out of a mature Christian? Somebody that's free from duplicity, dissimulation, and guile, someone that's innocent and harmless, that's undesigning, that's honest, that's open and straightforward. Isn't that what we're looking for? And that's who these guys are here to pull away from the truth and deceive. Because how else are you going to get these people to worship you if you're a liar? You're going to have to deceive them. And folks, there's a lot of people sitting in those pews that do all the paying and all the praying that are just so deceived. They have no idea what it is that they're actually worshiping, because those churches don't teach you anything. You're not going to hear this sermon in one of those churches. They're not going to open their mouths on this. One of the reasons that I think that none of the commentators even get involved in this is because we've become so ecumenical. We all just want to get along. Have you ever noticed that? You know, Catholics were responsible for killing off our religious ancestors by the thousands. And yet the Southern Baptist Convention gets along with them now? They're buddies, they're friends, because they're all teaching the same God that's not the God of the Bible. And these guys with the PhD behind their name, they know that. They full well know what they're doing. Look at Matthew chapter 7. Make this one final point on this, and then we'll move into the next section. We're just about finished, but for this morning. Matthew chapter 7, beginning at verse 15, where Jesus says, "Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits ye shall know them." We have a couple of people sitting here in the front of the room that went to one of these big-time Bible seminaries and got to see some of the fruits of some of these big-time preachers. I've seen some of it in my earlier days. These guys are not what they pretend to be on stage. They aren't. Behind the scenes, when you get to see who they really are, they are not anywhere near like what you would expect. They are some of the basest of men that you've ever run across. And yet when they get out on the stage, it's all a show for them. You'll know them by their fruits. You'll know. How many of them have ended up in trouble? Jimmy Swaggart and his pornography thing and whoring around with prostitutes in hotel rooms. And look at the trouble that these guys get into. Godly men don't do that. I've never cheated on my wife and never would, but they do it all the time. By their fruits, you'll know them. Just watch them. The Catholic Church with their, what they did with children over all of those years. Do you realize that at some of the old monasteries where nuns would live, they have dug up graveyards with basically aborted babies by the thousand because the nuns are carrying on with the priests? And they didn't have birth control back in those days, so just bury the kid and hide him away. Some of the things that some of these people have done down through the ages, it would shock you out of your socks if you ever read them. It's out there. The history books are out there. You can find them. You'll know them by their fruits. Now, those are the false ones. How do you know the real ones? They look like the simple. They're honest. They're straightforward. They do what they say they're going to do. And those are the very ones that these other guys are out trying to deceive, to pull them away from the truth so that they can worship a false god. And they're doing it because there's a lot of money in that. These guys make a lot of money. I remember asking Conrad Gerald one time, when the first time we were in his library, he had handed me a handed me a yellow legal pad and a pen. And we started going through, and he was pointing out books. You need to get this book, and you need to get this book. And I was very early in my studying, shortly after he moved to Las Vegas. And I asked him one time, I don't understand why these preachers preach lies. Why is that? He said, because there's a lot of money in false religion. I said, there is? He said, well, yeah. He said, how many people you know in the oil business? A couple. We lived in Bakersfield. It was oil country, so we did know a few. Then he said, how many people you know that go to church? Lots. That's why they do it. They do it to feed their belly. Devil does it because he wants to be worshiped. And they just follow their marching orders. Now, let's look at some of the Bible's teaching concerning these false teachers. Look first to 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. But there were false prophets also among the people, even as, that means in like manner, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many, the majority, that Greek word is paulos, it means the majority, many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. You see, as a result of all these people going the other way, they speak evil of us. They think we're the devil, when they're the ones worshiping the devil. And through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you, whose judgment now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not. False teachers that are going to rise up in the church, and he likens it to the false prophets in the Old Testament days. The same way. So let's look at that. Flip over to 1 Kings chapter 18. And we're going to look at verses 17 through 22. 1 Kings 18, 17. And it came to pass, when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said unto him, Art thou he that troubleth Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled in Israel, but thou and thy father's house, in that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and has followed Balaam. Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal, 450, and the prophets of the groves, 400, which eat at Jezebel's table. So far that's 850 to 1. 850 false prophets to 1 Elijah. So Ahab sent unto all the children of Israel, and gathered the prophets together unto Mount Carmel. And Elijah came unto the people and said, How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered not a word. Then said Elijah unto the people, I only remain a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. In other words, if there are going to be false teachers, even as there were false prophets, there's going to be multitudes of false preachers for every true preacher that's actually out there. 850 to 1 in this case. Look at chapter 22, verses 1 through 8. And they continued 3 years without war between Syria and Israel. And it came to pass in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel said unto his servants, Know ye that Ramoth and Gilead is ours, and we be still, and take it not out of the hand of the king of Syria? And he said unto Jehoshaphat, Wilt thou go with me to battle in Ramoth Gilead? And Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, I am as thou art, my people is thy people, my horses is thy horses. We're together. Of course I'll go with you. And Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, Inquire, I pray thee, at the word of the Lord today. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and said unto them, Shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? And they said, Go up, for the Lord shall deliver it into the hand of the king. And Jehoshaphat said, Is there not here a prophet of the Lord beside, that we might inquire of him? You see, he called all of his Baal prophets to him, all of his false prophets to him. And the other guy says, Hey, do you have a real one? You got a real prophet instead of these phonies? I'd like to know from him whether we should go up there or not. And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, There is yet one man, Micaiah, the son of Amal, by whom we may inquire of the Lord. But I hate him, for he doth not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. Boy, there's that opens the eyes, huh? He doesn't want to listen to the real guy. Real guy's going to tell him something he doesn't like. 400 to 1, 850 to 1. That's what you expect to find. Remember, many, the majority, shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. They'll talk bad about us because there's so many of them, and they look at the numbers. They don't pay any attention at all to the God they're worshiping or what they are worshiping. Look at Jude verses 3 and 4. Again, Jude is that little bitty tiny book way back just before Revelation. Jude verses 3 and 4. Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that ye should earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints. Why? Because there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men, turning the grace of our God into lasciviousness and denying the only Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ. These guys sneak into the church and start twisting things around and pulling disciples away from them. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Verses 13 through 15, where Paul says, For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. You see, these guys work for the devil. They look like what you would expect a Christian minister to look like. But they don't work for the God of heaven. They work for the devil. He's their God. And he's who they're preaching. And they're scattered in all of these churches, especially the ones that have the phallic symbols on the roofs. Now, There is a provision that God has made to protect his children if they will pay attention to it. Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, beginning at verse 11. And he gave some apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. God provided pastors for his people, if they'll listen. But here's the clue. Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 20. How do you know that the pastor you got is the one he sent? And he's not one of these phony guys. How do you know? We're told right here, to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it's because there's no light in them. If the pastor teaches this Bible the way this Bible's written, then he's one of God's pastors. If he doesn't, and he's not teaching according to what the word says, then he's not. Run away. Be like Forrest Gump and run, Forrest, run. Now, next week, Lord willing, we're going to look at 4 distinct and commonly taught attributes of the Jesus of the world. We're going to look at a cult position. We're going to look at some other positions of some of these churches, a few things that are unmistakably different from the Jesus of the Bible. So when we look at the Jesus of the Bible and then we compare that to the Jesus that's taught in the churches out in the world, you're going to see they're teaching another Jesus. They're not teaching the Jesus of the Bible. And as I've already shown you, if you're worshiping a Jesus that is not the Jesus of the Bible, you're worshiping a devil. It's a false god. He can't help you. He can't help you at all. He can't help you any more than an idol carved out of wood can help you. He's a fake. Now with that, I thank you for your very kind and patient attention this morning. Let's stand and be dismissed in prayer.